Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for Gameweek 10, where I'll build the ultimate 15-man squad for the long term. I'll start off with the 2 goalkeepers and then build my way up through every single position, but towards the very end, I'll highlight the top 10 captains for the upcoming deadline, and you can see Nottingham Forest have been very poor this season with a clear team weakness on their right-hand side, and I think Bryan Mbeumo could exploit that. The heat map does point towards his positions and touches so far this season in the Premier League, and the blue circles indicate Nottingham Forest's chances conceded from game weeks 1 to 9 up until this point. And I think Bryan Mbeumo, despite not having the best of records against Nottingham Forest, could reward those new owners with massive returns like he did against Brighton, producing 15 points overall, and he has been the most consistent Man United asset over the last 3 game weeks, and he's right up there amongst the high-scoring midfielders in FPL, only behind Antoine Semenyo at this moment in time. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content for both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Matchday 4 content will return over the coming days, and next Tuesday there will be a deadline stream where I'll answer hundreds of your questions. The same goes for FPL this weekend on the Saturday, and there could also be a reaction stream as well. If you are interested in another predicted lineups podcast before the deadline, then let's get this video to over 100 likes and push towards new goals like 37 for our subscribers. Check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, fair likes to my videos, prior to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL and FPL Challenge Leagues, as well as Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. My squad value is 101.4 million with 0.1 in the bank, so in total you would say I've got 101.5 million to spend, but that's not necessarily the case. As I always point out, there is a difference between purchase prices and selling prices, and that's why in terms of spending power I would only have around 100.1 million to spend on this 15-man squad. So as usual, we'll start off from the bottom. You could argue it's the least important position, but you would also want to avoid making transfers in this position because the higher upside will be in the outfield areas. So picking 2 very decent goalkeepers with nice rotation, or at least that sort of ability to pick up points when you least expect them to, will be very important in the long run. David Raya has kept the most clean sheets of any goalkeeper so far this season, but he is second in terms of the overall goalkeeper charts, with Roofs from Sunderland being their standout overall. But the Black Cats have poor fixtures on the horizon, and with Arsenal, even in difficult fixtures, they can keep clean sheets, like Man United away back in game week 1, and they've only conceded 3 goals across all competitions this season in 13 matches, and one of them was from open play. So David Raya is the safest pair of hands you can pick. He is 5.7 million, but at the same price, you can also get Donnarumma, and Man City won't keep as many clean sheets as Arsenal this season, so you can't go wrong with David Raya. And you also have no risk of rotation like you would get with Jurrien Timber, William Saliba, who's an injury doubt against Burnley this weekend, and a few others like Calafiori, and even Gabriel on the odd occasion, although he's the safest Arsenal defender you can go for, and my favourite Arsenal asset overall. But the backup goalkeeper is 7th in terms of FPL points scored amongst goalkeepers, and that's Martin Dubravka at 4 million. You don't need to have an expensive backup or have someone like Sanchez and Raya. That would be too much money in the goalkeeper position. So pick one main option like a Raya, Nick Pope, and even Roofs would be decent in the long term. But after that, I think Dubravka is all you need as the backup. Gabriel is top amongst defenders for FPL points scored. He's getting goal contributions in the Champions League against Atletico Madrid with a goal and assist. He's done it in the Premier League on a few occasions, and he's always getting 9 to 12 points in recent matches. He scored a win against Newcastle a couple of weeks ago. He got 9 points against West Ham because of DEFCON and also a bonus point. And against Fulham, he got an assist, didn't play particularly well, but got maximum bonus points with 12 points overall. And he did the same thing really in the recent game for Arsenal against Crystal Palace, where he got maximum bonus points alongside Eze and delivered 9 points in general. So you can get bonus points, DEFCON, goals and assists, and plenty of clean sheets from Gabriel. He's the most nailed-on Arsenal defender. With Piero Hincapié now back in the mix, we could see rotation in certain Premier League games, but I don't think that'll be the case anytime soon. We'll see how Arsenal line up against Brighton in the Carabao Cup on Wednesday night, but I don't expect the likes of Gabriel to start, and even if he does, I still back him in the long term to start 30 to 35 Premier League games this season, and Arsenal will have the eyes set on lifting that Premier League title. You can triple up on the Gunners defensively with Jurrien Timber as well, and then have Raya in goal and Gabriel, but ultimately I'm leaving a spot open for an attacker in the midfield or forward line. And not only do you have Bukayo Saka and Victor Gyökeres, who have been a bit underwhelming so far this season, but Declan Rice is so consistent at 6.7 million. He is worth that sort of inclusion in the midfield, and I don't think he's a bad FPL asset by any stretch of the imagination. But let's now cover some different defenses and teams, and Daniel Munoz is one of them. He is bettered by Mark Gay in terms of FPL points scored so far this season, but Munoz has a higher ceiling, and in recent matches he has been outscoring every other Crystal Palace asset, with the exception of Jean-Philippe Mateta back in Gameweek 8 when he scored a hat-trick. But Daniel Munoz got 2 assists in that particular game. He costs 5.7 million. He's fixture proof. He can get DEFCON. My only concern with the Colombian is the amount of yellow cards he can pick up, but I still think he'll get plenty of bonus points and attacking returns this season, and I don't mind having 2 or 3 premium defenders in Fantasy Premier League. And with the changes this season, with defensive contributions being a major factor, I think typically we would favour centre-backs over wing-backs now, but Daniel Munoz is one of those rare exceptions. If you are getting bored of FPL or want to go for something a little bit different, I think Daniel Munoz with around 13% ownership will give you that sort of exciting so-called differential. His ownership is relatively low, and any returns he does get will actually give you massive rank rises in terms of the overall leaderboards and your mini leagues, because the effective ownership will still be quite low. And Daniel Munoz is very exciting to own in Fantasy Premier League, and I would prefer him over every other Crystal Palace defender. The best value can be found with Chris Richards, who can get DEFCON very consistently. He only costs 4.5 million, and you can't go wrong with any of those Palace defenders. Even Tyrick Mitchell is decent, although he's my least favourite, and if there was one to drop out on the odd occasion, I think it would be him for Borna Sosa. But Crystal Palace have the most fixed and nailed on starting 11 in the Premier League, and Daniel Munoz is a machine. He plays 90 minutes week in, week out, so even if he does play in the Carabao Cup and all these other competitions like the Conference League, he's still going to get those minutes in the Premier League as well, and there is no risk of rotation whatsoever. But let's now move on to the other defenders, and one of them is from Sunderland, despite some poor fixtures on the horizon, and I think Michele is the best, even though Alderete should be back by Gameweek 10 against Everton at home, and that is the fixture where you would want to start these Sunderland assets. That also includes Roofs in goal, and even in more difficult fixtures, we saw them get the win against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, but no massive returns there for the defenders or Roofs in goal, and ultimately you wouldn't expect too many clean sheets over the coming weeks. So Michele will just be there as your 5th defender and a backup option when needed, and it could be very useful for people who are bench boosting this week. But of course, if you are wildcarding in Gameweek 10, you won't be able to use the bench boost or any other chip at the same time. Let's now complete this defensive line with 2 other options, and I'd still cover Newcastle defensively with Dan Burn, but he was extremely poor against Fulham, I have to say that, and I was a bit disappointed by buying him in Gameweek 9, getting a 2-pointer, and he was quite catastrophic, I would say. He was really poor in that match, but I still expect Dan Burn to be a solid option in the long term. A few Newcastle defenders will return very soon, like Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall, and that could also alter the way Newcastle set up. And Dan Burn is currently playing as a left back, but Eddie Howe always finds a way to put Dan Burn into the team, and with Kieran Trippier, I like him in the short term until Tino Livramento is back, which should be in a couple of weeks' time, and Lewis Hall is the closest to being available. That could be the case by Gameweek 10, as Eddie Howe talked about in his press conference before the Carabao Cup matches in midweek. But we have 1 spot left in this defensive line, and despite some underwhelming returns recently, I think Marcus Senesi is still one of the very best when it comes to DEFCON. He costs 5 million, and you could find better value with Troffer or Diakite, but Senesi is a little bit more reliable when it comes to the extra points from bonus and defensive contributions. He's also got some decent attacking potential for a centre-back. He can get a few goals and assists from set pieces, like he did against Leeds a couple of months ago, and I do like this defensive line overall. There is no Chelsea, despite their promising fixtures over the next 4 game weeks, but they're quite unreliable defensively anyway, and Reece James has the highest ceiling. I don't mind him as a punt until Game Week 13, but I certainly wouldn't pick him over Jurrien Timber or the premiums discussed in this podcast so far in Daniel Munoz and Gabriel. Bryan Mbeumo has been the most informed midfielder in Fantasy Premier League over the last couple of weeks. He got an assist against Sunderland and 6 points a few weeks ago, and that was the start of Man United's mini run with 3 consecutive wins in the Premier League. They beat Liverpool 2-1, and Bryan Mbeumo scored the first goal, which was so crucial, and he got another solid return. And that 15-pointer against Brighton caught everyone's attention, and people will be flocking towards him right now. Despite not having a great record against Nottingham Forest, he still has that ability to get a massive return, combining a goal and assist in the same game, and he can also score braces from time to time, and he got 20 Premier League goals for Brentford last season, and of course a lot of them were from penalties, but he also has that sort of ability to score from those set pieces. And if Bruno Fernandes isn't on the pitch, which will be quite rare to be honest, Bryan Mbeumo will be next in line to take those penalties. But Amram did discuss this recently, and he stated that Bruno Fernandes will still be the main penalty taker, so bear that in mind. And in a week like this against Nottingham Forest, it wouldn't surprise me if Bruno was the standout Man United midfielder this week. But overall, Bryan Mbeumo offers better value and higher goal scoring potential, particularly from open play. The next midfielder is Ndai, but I wouldn't mind replacing him with Declan Rice and having that triple up in the Arsenal team that way. He only costs 6.7 million, whilst Ndai is 6.5. But what I like about the Senegalese winger is he can get DEFCON, he also can get goals, and despite the lack of assists so far this season, he is offering some decent underlying stats when it comes to creativity, with 3 big chances created and over 13 key passes so far this season. So I think the assists will come, but ultimately the Toffees have some poor attackers in terms of finishing, with Better or Barry up front. Dewsbury Hall and Grealish are decent, but not the best of finishers. So with Ndai, the main kind of appeal is the fact he's a penalty taker and he's so cheap, with some promising fixtures on the horizon. Sunderland away might not be the best actually, despite it being a green fixture on the FDR, but I think Ndai can still score in such a fixture, and he's going to be one of the very best at this price point and below. You've also got Minter facing Leeds at home, and Brighton are near the top of the fixture difficulty rating, so I wouldn't really mind him too much, but I would go for 2 other midfielders at a similar price point of 6.5 to 6.7 million. One of them is Ismaila Sarr, and I think having a double up in the Crystal Palace team is probably the sweet spot. You can also go for the triple up with Jean-Philippe Mateta up front, or maybe have 2 Crystal Palace defenders, but my preference would be 2 attackers in Ismaila Sarr and Mateta, and then 1 defender, ideally Daniel Munoz, but the others are still quite decent. And Ismaila Sarr has solid underlying numbers, but it will be dwarfed by the amount of big chances Jean-Philippe Mateta is getting this season, with over 15 up until this point. The XG is also crazy at almost 8 there for Mateta, and he has underperformed when it comes to the goal scoring. But Sarr will also put up some decent numbers, particularly at his price point, and it will be a tough call picking between him and Enzo Fernandez. But on a wild card, why not go for both and target Chelsea's decent fixtures up until Gameweek 13, and some of them, like Wolves at home, look incredible on paper. I also think Enzo Fernandez can do very well this weekend against Tottenham Hotspur. He did so last season, and he's got a good record against the Lily Whites, and having that Chelsea attacker is still viable, and Enzo Fernandez is the best at this moment in time. But there is one spot left, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. But I have to say, despite a few mishaps in recent weeks and maybe a bit of frustration in terms of the lack of returns, I still think Antoine Semenyo is worth including in this wildcard team. He costs 8.1 million. If you had him before this point, I would definitely include him in this wildcard team. For those that went without, and you're going to struggle maybe to get towards him because he does cost 8.1, it might be a bit of a different story, but Antoine Semenyo is still the most consistent asset so far this season in the midfield, and he can rival the likes of Erling Haaland in a couple of weeks. But the next 2 fixtures aren't great, against Man City and Aston Villa away on paper. But Semenyo is fixture proof. We saw this last season when he was so frustrating as an FPL asset. He would return in fixtures like Gameweeks 10 and 11 coming up, and then blank in the so-called easier games. But now he's being more consistent, scoring more goals. He has overperformed up until this point as well, but I still think the underlying numbers are quite sustainable and healthy. They're not completely terrible, and I don't expect a massive drop-off, but we have seen a slight decline in recent weeks. But I think Antoine Semenyo is still the Bournemouth talisman and worth including in your FPL setup. Despite blanking for only the 2nd time this season against Aston Villa away, Erling Haaland has a 40-point lead at the top of the forward charts when it comes to FPL points scored. He has 85 so far this season. That's also 12 more than any other player. Antoine Semenyo is 2nd up until this point, but I think Erling Haaland is still captainable in fixtures like Bournemouth at home, where Man City will have that advantage at the Etihad. But despite battering the cherries on several occasions at the Etihad. Erling Haaland hasn't really been getting the big returns in those matches, but this season we have seen a clear pattern. If Erling Haaland doesn't score, Man City struggle to also do so, and they ultimately end up losing the matches like they did against Tottenham back in Gameweek 2 and against Aston Villa in Gameweek 9. But Erling Haaland will still get big chances in those matches. He got one huge opportunity against Villa, and Emi Martinez denied him with a brilliant save. But Haaland's goal scoring, the underlying stats are all incredible, with 11 goals in 9 Premier League matches up until this point, and ultimately no premium is really offering that consistency or the high ceiling to rival Erling Haaland when it comes to the captaincy on a regular basis. Mohamed Salah's had a poor start to this season. The same goes for Bukayo Saka and Cole Palmer, albeit because of different reasons like injuries, for example. But I still think once those players come good, they'll only be good for FPL as we have more variety and options at our disposal, so we don't just default Erling Haaland as the captain every single week. But I think for Gameweek 10, an Arsenal player would be very encouraging, like Bukayo Saka in the midfield, maybe even a Gabriel or Timber could be captain as well, over an Erling Haaland, who is facing a Bournemouth side who are second in the Premier League table. But speaking of second, I'm going for Igor Thiago, who has 45 FPL points and he offers great value at 6.2 million. He scored against Liverpool but was also booked. He delivered 5 points on that occasion, and he has been very consistent for Brentford, who won 5-0 against Grimsby Town in the Carabao Cup. They're looking quite decent under Keith Andrews after a bit of a rocky start at the very beginning. But Igor Thiago is on penalties, which is a massive boost as an FPL asset, particularly at this price point. He is the perfect 8th attacker and 3rd forward, and you would be hesitant to bench him in certain occasions. But against Crystal Palace, for example, especially if you're starting Daniel Munoz, you might be tempted to do so this week, but I'll discuss the starting 11 using the website FPL.team very soon. The 3rd and final forward is Nick Voltemada, and I do have money in the bank, despite what it says here on the FPL website. You'll see that I've got 0.8 million in the bank using the website FPL.team, but you could go for Jean-Philippe Mateta instead. I personally wouldn't pick Joao Pedro or Jared Bowen on the wildcard over Voltemada, but those two players have promising fixtures on the horizon. In the case of West Ham, they've got Burnley in Gameweek 11, and Bowen is fixture-proof anyway. He played very well against Leeds, but the problem with Bowen is he plays for West Ham, and they've been absolutely diabolical so far this season, and Joao Pedro isn't getting shots off, and he has been playing through an injury over the last couple of weeks, and that's a massive concern. But I think you've got plenty of options in the forward line, like Victor Gyökeres as well, but not many are standing out over the rest. I think the odd exceptions to this are Erling Haaland, who goes without saying, and then possibly one of Thiago or Nick Voltemada, who have done extremely well on averaging a decent points per game potential up until this point, with solid underlying numbers as well. And the fact that Voltemada is second in command for penalties, and when Anthony Gordon is on the pitch, you'll see Voltemada take them, and Igor Thiago is first choice for Brentford. That is all a massive boost when it comes to the FPL appeal, and I think these forwards are going to complement the midfielders and offer you a lot of consistency and returns. There is no contest between the sticks. I would start David Raya in that clash between Burnley and Arsenal over the weekend, with Daniel Munoz, Mukiele and Gabriel in that defensive line. And when you double or triple up on a certain defence, you might be tempted at times to bench one of those players and then diversify your defensive line, and that could happen against the likes of Tottenham and Chelsea in a couple of weeks' time, because Arsenal have great fixtures over the next 2, but then some challenging London derbies very soon. In the midfield, I've gone for Mbumo, Ndai, Semenyo, Ismail Assar and Enzo Fernandez, which in the long term looks extremely solid, and Voltemada and Haaland up front. That means Igor Thiago is first on the bench, which I'm not particularly happy about. Dan Burn is second, facing West Ham away, and Senesi is facing Man City away. But let me discuss a few alternatives you could make. So, for example, for those that bought Jurrien Timber quite early and can afford Senesi to Timber, that is something you might want to consider, or even Dan Burn and tripling up on the Arsenal defence. But it's not just that. You can also keep the likes of Senesi and then make another upgrade like Ndai to Declan Rice, which I talked about earlier. I wouldn't mind that so much, and I think he's going under the radar. He's got the most points of any Arsenal midfielder, and he offers better value than Bukayo Saka and Victor Gyökeres at this moment in time, but the returns will be quite difficult to predict in the grand scheme of things. I also talked about Voltemada to Jean-Philippe Mateta, and you have a few other budget forwards like Isidore or Danny Welbeck that you might prefer over Igor Thiago, but I personally wouldn't go for Isidore right now, with the Black Cats having tough fixtures on paper, and I think having Mukiele or Roofs would be enough to cover that Sunderland team in general, and that's about it. That is all you need from Sunderland. Despite their impressive start, they are 4th in the Premier League table. There's still 0.3 million in the bank, so you could do Dan Burn to Reece James, for example. But of course, it does depend on when you bought or sold certain players as well. But that is just a few other ideas for you to consider. And if you want to go for Reece James or a Chelsea defender, then maybe you can go for something like this and sell one of Dan Burn or Senesi for Reece James. It all depends on your setup. But I just wanted to show you in this segment a few other alternatives that you could pick. And ultimately, I would go for Nick Voltemada over Mateta if you got Ismaila Sarr in your 15-man squad as well. So the expected points is around 58.6, but of course I've messed around a little bit in terms of certain players that I want to kind of highlight in every single position and alternatives. If you were to buy Reece James, I'd even be tempted to start him against Tottenham away. But in terms of the free hit, this is something I would build towards, and it's very similar actually to the wildcard squad with Rufus in goal, Munoz, Timber and Gabriel. The midfield is identical. The only key difference really is Minter and Saka. So those two would bolster that midfield for Gameweek 10. Mbeumo, Sarr and Enzo Fernandez remain, and up front Nick Voltemada against the struggling West Ham side and Erling Haaland as the captain. But I would be very tempted to go for one of Saka or Gabriel with the captaincy this week. And for those with Salah, he would also be right up there in the captaincy list. Despite a poor start to the season, Liverpool have a great record against Aston Villa, and you would still back them at Anfield to turn things around after 4 consecutive losses in the Premier League. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Who would you captain and vice captain? Which players would you include on the free hit? And when are you looking to play that chip as well as the wild card? My current plan, which I talked about in my team selection, is the bench boost in Gameweek 10, free hit in Gameweek 11 and wild card in Gameweek 13. But I'm also quite open-minded, and the free hit could be saved for later in the season. And with the wild card, it could be deployed a little bit earlier in Gameweek 12. But the free hit is ultimately the most team-dependent booster of them all, and for some people it makes sense to use it in Gameweek 10, but I just don't really see a massive upside in my own situation, and the bench boost is something I'd like to get rid of as soon as possible. There are some surprises in the top 10 captaincy list, and that includes Jean-Philippe Mateta, who some people might rank higher with his incredible underlying stats, but I've got him at 10th, facing Brentford at home. He has never scored or assisted against the Beast throughout his career, and Brentford are looking solid in recent matches. Bruno Fernandes is 9th, facing Nottingham Forest away. Enzo Fernandez is 8th in that London derby against Tottenham. Voltemada is 7th, facing a struggling West Ham side. And Victor Gyökeres is 6th, despite not scoring or assisting in the Premier League since Gameweek 4. He got that brace against Atletico Madrid in the Premier League, and all his returns have been at the Emirates so far this season. But this could be a great opportunity to break that sort of goal-scoring drought on the travels. Bryan Mbeumo is 5th, facing Nottingham Forest away, and Gabriel is 4th. It seems crazy to have a defender so high in the captaincy list, but I think with DEFCON and also Gabriel's consistency, it makes a lot of sense to have him ranked that highly, and some may argue he should be in the top 3 over Salah and possibly even over Bukayo Saka in second place. But Erling Haaland remains top, facing Bournemouth at home. He doesn't have a good record against the Cherries. It's one of the few sides he has struggled against throughout his career, especially in home matches. Even in that 6-1 that happened a few years ago, Haaland was subbed off at half-time, and last season it was a 3-1 win for Man City at the Etihad, and Erling Haaland didn't do particularly well. But I still think this top 10 list looks very solid. It is subject to change, and I think Gabriel could be one who moves up even further in this list. And Nigerian Timber or Declan Rice could also be considered for the captaincy, and there is no clear standout in Gameweek 10. I think up until Gameweek 8, Erling Haaland was the sort of default and definitely the standout captaincy option, but there has been a shift, of course, since Gameweek 9, where most 10-play midfielders and forwards blanked, and that obviously causes this narrative of defenders carrying our FPL teams this season, and we should go to a back 5 all the time. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I understand that DEFCON has definitely made things a lot different this season, especially with centre-backs and holding midfielders. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below as always, and drop a like on this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date on my content, both FPL and UCL Fantasy. Let's get this video to over 100 likes and close in on new goals like 37 for subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram, Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the Chumships, for access to my videos, prior to to comments, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify. It also boosts us up even further. I'll see you on Saturday for the next FPL deadline stream, and stay tuned for UCL Fantasy content over the weekend.